The Unfinished Nightmare. In our neighborhood, there was a peculiar house known as the Eternal Build. Its construction seemed to be in a perpetual state of incompleteness, standing vacant and untouched for many years. The house sat amidst a rather unsettling block, surrounded by homes that appeared deserted or neglected, their lawns overgrown and wild. My pals, Sarah, Alex, Chris, and I found ourselves bored one night, cruising around town. After a quick stop for some fast food, Chris suggested we pay a visit to the Eternal Build and maybe even venture inside. The idea intrigued us all, and we eagerly agreed. Parking a few houses down, the street had only a single streetlight, leaving the rest cloaked in darkness, adding to the eerie ambiance. Nearby houses seemed abandoned, with a few cars parked in driveways. We carefully made our way out of the car, trying not to make a sound, and approached the enigmatic Eternal Build. The sight of the unfinished two-story structure in the dead of night sent chills down our spines. Our task was to find a way inside. The front door was locked, so we circled the house, testing every window until one of them slid open. Chris, being the most agile, climbed in through the window and unlocked the back door for the rest of us. Surprisingly, the back door was already ajar, accessible to anyone. As we entered, a repugnant odor, a mix of wood and something foul like rotting cat urine, filled the air. The first floor was more complete than expected, spacious with numerous rooms, yet devoid of furniture. We decided to split up, each exploring different directions. I ventured upstairs to the second floor, finding it a bit more unfinished with exposed wall framing. While I was investigating, I heard rustling downstairs, indicating my friends were being too loud. I made my way back down, meeting Chris, who asked about the upper floor. I mentioned it was somewhat unfinished, but curiosity got the best of him, and he decided to check it out anyway. Driven by my own curiosity, I searched for the basement and found it concealed behind a brown door beneath the stairs. As I descended, a pungent odor resembling cat urine greeted me. The basement appeared more dilapidated than the rest of the house, with a stained concrete floor, a wooden chair, and a table holding a book, the Holy Bible, in one corner. While exploring, I heard footsteps descending the stairs. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. I turned and saw a figure sitting against the wall. It took a moment to realize she wasn't Sarah or Alex. Instead, it was a disheveled woman with long, tangled hair, staring at me. Shortly after, one of the others upstairs screamed, and Chris called my name, urging us to leave. Without a second thought, I sprinted out of the basement and up the stairs. I saw my friends rushing out through the back door. I had no clue what they had witnessed, but I followed them and asked what happened. They mentioned seeing two men in one of the empty rooms on the first floor, unable to identify the dark objects scattered across the floor. I remained unsure about the events in that house, whether it was some sinister cult or simply homeless individuals seeking refuge. Nevertheless, I vowed never to return. I have since moved away, and I don't know what happened to that house. According to the most recent Google Maps image from 2020, it remained in its perpetual state of incompleteness. Echoes in the night. In our quiet neighborhood where tranquility was the norm, an unsettling incident unfolded, etching itself permanently into my memory. This peculiar event took place during a summer several years ago, leaving an indelible mark on both my conscience and my friend Danny's. Danny and I were mischievous teenagers, often seeking trouble for the thrill of it. In hindsight, I struggled to comprehend our actions. Perhaps it was an expression of youthful rebellion, given that we lived on the same street and spent most afternoons together, our suburban neighborhood leaving little to entertain us. In our midst stood an infamous mansion atop a nearby hill, abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. It held no allure, having been explored by every kid in town. Its eerie presence was accentuated by its proximity to a vast cemetery. This mansion, adjacent to the cemetery, served as a fallback plan for Danny and me whenever boredom struck. We'd spray graffiti or simply relax on the roof, finding refuge within its decaying walls. And so it happened one late night. Around 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, plans with a couple of girls had fallen through, leaving us disappointed. In our slightly intoxicated state, we reckoned that throwing rocks at the mansion would be a suitable way to vent our frustrations. If we had been sober, we might have thought twice about such reckless behavior, but it was summer, and we were carefree. Convinced Danny not to drive, we embarked on a 20-minute walk to the hill, greeted by the familiar yet eerie sight of the mansion. Vines twisted and hung from the muddy bricks, shattered windows, and a roof with menacing edges, all adding to its ominous aura. Without a second thought, Danny picked up a stone and hurled it toward the house, shattering a fourth-floor window. Excitedly, I followed suit, puncturing a window on the second floor. But just before the fourth floor, there was a lone small window, likely an attic, standing as the highest room in the house. Danny aimed to hit it, and astonishingly, he succeeded. The rock shattered the attic window, leaving us both in awe. As we stood there admiring what we had done, a dark object flew out of the shattered window and landed in front of us. A rock identical to the one Danny had just thrown, bearing a D imprint. We stood there, shaken and puzzled. It was late, and the only explanation we could muster was that other kids were trying to scare us. Despite our apprehension, we decided to surprise them instead. Quietly, we approached the front door, ducking under a thick vine. The door was slightly ajar, as always, misaligned and unable to close properly. As silently as possible, we stepped inside, our senses adjusting to the minimal light and the stench of mildew and rot. We cautiously ascended the creaky stairs, reaching the fourth floor and standing at the base of the final staircase. This room had eluded us in previous visits. Danny opened the wooden door, revealing a room that reeked of death and decay. To our surprise, the room was empty. But as I turned to leave, I glimpsed two cloaked figures looking up at us from the staircase. We were in trouble. We heard the door being forced open, prompting us to sprint across the roof to the entrance we knew. The darkness made it perilous, but we pressed on, fearing what might happen if we stayed. I followed Danny onto the roof, only to find the entrance locked from the inside. A deep voice shouted, "They went that way!" Fueled by fear, I stomped on the hatch, breaking it open. The force propelled me into the hole, and I grabbed the ladder, narrowly escaping serious injury. We escaped the mansion, running into the cemetery and hiding behind a gravestone, watching as cloaked figures scoured the property. We haven't returned since, haunted by the thought that we stumbled upon a clandestine cult gathering. The reasons for their choice of venue, an abandoned house, continue to baffle me. Screams in the silence. In the year 2019, during my time rushing a fraternity in college, our pledge class embarked on a peculiar tradition, a trip to an abandoned hospital in a nearby town. Carpooling with a few pledge brothers, including Carl, we parked near a vast park adjacent to the hospital, ready for the Eerie adventure. As tradition dictated, we walked down a path towards the hospital through a small wooded area. I, regrettably, had chosen the wrong footwear for the occasion, bemoaning my impractical white Air Max 90. The sight of the towering, darkened hospital, once bustling with life, sent shivers down our spines. Several members of our group knew the clandestine entryways, one being a lower window that had been shattered. I lingered near the back as we descended through the window, finding ourselves in a damp underground level. Carl and I, at the rear of the group, navigated the gloomy hallways, untouched by graffiti, revealing the abandoned building's desolate history. A few members began to split into smaller groups, exploring different directions. In a hospital room with remnants of beds and medical equipment, Carl and I heard faint footsteps passing the doorway, glimpsing a fleeting shadow. Startled, we called out, only to see a figure move down the corridor into an adjacent room. Tense and unsure, I ventured into the hallway, spotting someone further down, but unable to discern their orientation. We decided to retreat to the safety of the group, heading back in the opposite direction. The distant sounds of our pledge brothers were suddenly drowned out by a horrific, agonizing scream of a woman, sending shivers down our spines. Panic set in as we sprinted back towards the group, urging them to move. We hastily retreated to the lower level, hearing footsteps approaching. Footsteps that didn't belong to anyone in our group. The urgency intensified as we scrambled to crawl out of the window, each of us fearing a menacing grip on our legs. "Keep screaming, move quickly," we urged one another. Finally, after a nerve-wracking escape, we reached our cars, catching our breaths. I recounted seeing a person in the corridor where Carl and I were, the very place from which the blood-curdling screams had emanated. Shaken, we left the site, our appetite for urban exploration forever diminished.